The gospel is a call to emphasize what is important in life and faith and not allow incidentals to overshadow the essential. It is about priorities. Jesus and his followers are criticized for not washing their hands in traditional and ritual manner. Jesus turns it around to challenge his challengers on what is key in God's law. He drives home his point with earthy gusto. The central point of the passage may be a call for us to look closely at our own style of life and faith, where it is often easier to be picky than to follow Jesus' way and life. Let us listen closely for the good news for us in Mark 7, verses 1 through 8, 14 and 15, 21 through 23. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who have come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. They do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it, and there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about your hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandments of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then he called the crowd and again said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that is going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come, from fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within. They defile a person.
Our focus reading this morning comes to us from the Epistle of James, the first chapter, verses 17 through 27. It can be found on page 229 in the New Testament section of your pew Bibles. The epistle reading is from the letter of James, and it's not addressed to anyone in particular or any particular church, and therefore it is considered one of the general epistles or general letters. It was formally included in the New Testament in 397 ADE, in part because it was not seen as coming from an apostle. So it came a little later in its approval. The letter offers practical advice, sometimes almost in the style of the book of Proverbs, written in a poetic style to help us remember. The brothers and sisters are fellow believers, part of God's family. So let us listen, ready to remember and learn as we read from James chapter 1, verses 17 through 27. Every good endowment and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Know this, my beloved brethren. Let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not work the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rank growth of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who observes his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But he who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer that forgets, but a doer that acts, he shall be blessed in his doing. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this man's religion is vain. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. The word of the Lord through the writer James. We give praise and thanks. Amen. There was a couple, older, and they were getting ready for bed one night. And as the husband was getting into bed, his wife was standing in front of the mirror, and she said, "Oh, darling, I don't know what's happened to us, but I look in the mirror and I see that I'm fat, I'm full of wrinkles, everything is sagging, and it just doesn't seem right. Would you please tell me something that's good about me?" Well, the husband kind of thought for a moment, and then he said, "Well, your eyesight's pretty good." So, yeah. All right, now. All right, now we're going to turn the tables now. A woman, husband and wife again. So women, you get your chance on this one. The wife was having some exploratory tests done and had to be anesthetized for that. And so she's in the recovery room, and the husband is sitting by the bed, and she gradually gains consciousness, and she looks at him and she says, "Oh, darling, you're so handsome." And he just kind of smiles smugly at himself, and she goes back into sleep. And she wakes up a few moments later, and she looks at him and says, "Oh, honey, you are so cute." He said, "Well, what happened to my being handsome?" And she said, "I think the drugs are wearing off." So, now fair is fair, right? Now, if we're honest with ourselves, though, we would look at that and would say, that is not at all what James is talking about us doing. That is not, and it's a perfect example of what not to do, of not being hearers and doers of the Word of God. You know, for James, as actions speak louder than your words, at least they speak equally as your words and actions are done. Now, Martin Luther, the great Protestant reformer, had a problem with James. You know, he said that James's letter was an epistle of straw. Now, you have to realize that Martin Luther is coming out of his Catholic tradition, that he was a Roman Catholic priest that was trying to reform the Catholic Church, and the church gave him such a hard time, in fact, even putting out death warrants on his life, that he had to, in faith, create the Lutheran Church, the Reformation. So he looked at James as an emphasis of doing good works to gain God's grace. So he went completely opposite of what the Catholic Church was promoting, because Catholic Church was saying you need to do good works to receive God's grace. But it isn't either or, but it's both and. You know, the contemporary, at least, and I say that loosely because, you know, Rich Mullins was a contemporary Christian writer of Christian music back in the 80s and 90s. So I say contemporary, but, you know, he passed on in the late 90s, and so he didn't have the opportunity to add any more to that. But one of the songs that I truly love that he wrote is titled, "Having Faith Without Good Deeds is Like Having a Screen Door on a Submarine." How true. I mean, if all we do is talk about our faith without the actions, then where is our Christianity? But I know that you as a congregation has had the historical sense of having actions combined with words as you went about creating the Ephrata Manor and Cocalico House and the missions that went out to the west in the Dakotas, to the Sioux. And so historically you have been there with both words and deeds. But it's so easy for us to lose a sense of those deeds and what it means. You know, James says, you know, not only does he talk about, you know, being active in your faith, but he has kind of this list of things that you're not supposed to do. You know, he said, you know, don't get angry, or at least be slow to anger. And in the gospel reading, at the conclusion of that, we had this list of things that we are not to be or not to do. Well, I'll share a story with you of personal. And it comes sometime back in the early disco era. So that kind of places it for you, I think. For those of you that are too young to know the disco era, it's like the late 70s or so. And as a young man, I was looking for work. And was in Cleveland at the time. And a new restaurant had opened. Actually, it was a disco restaurant both. It was in the theater district of Cleveland, so in the downtown area. And the investors got the idea of doing a movie theme, being in the theater district and all. And so they named the disco restaurant The Last Moving Picture Company. And of course, you'd walk into the entranceway into, and basically the disco was on the first street level, and so you'd walk into the street level, and it was like walking into the entrance of a movie theater. There were movie posters all over the place. There was red carpet all over the floors, and there were chandeliers glowing. I mean, that kind of go back to the era of the great movie houses of the 50s and 60s. And then you'd walk through double doors, and there would be a bar on the right with all the mirrors and glass and glitter, and then the disco dance floor in the center of the area with tables all around. And then you'd have this brass stairwell, you know, the brass railings leading down on these red carpeted steps into the basement area, but the basement area was done up with Tiffany lamps and again more movie posters. So they had a great idea in marketing, and the menu was again under that theme. You had the Marilyn Monroe for dessert, a cheesecake. I mean, how appropriate, right? Yeah. And of course, then they had the W.C. Fields. I forget what that was, but you know, all of the items, appetizers through desserts, were given a movie star name, and that's how you would order the items. So I thought, I'll get a job there as a waiter. So I walked down there in between the lunch and the dinner shift and asked to talk to the manager and said I'd like a waiting job. And he had me fill out the application, and then he sat me down and we go through the interview process. And at the conclusion of it, he says, well, we don't have any waiting positions open. I mean, he could have told me that right at the very beginning, right? Yeah. But he said, we do have busboy positions available. And I said, well, I really don't want to be a busboy. I want to be a waiter. That's where my qualifications are. And he said, well, I tell you what. We'll hire you as a busboy. We'll see how you work out. And the next opening that we have, presuming that you work out well as a busboy, we'll promote you into the waiting staff. I said, all right, that sounds good. I'll agree to that. So I started bussing tables and meeting the waiting staff and the cooks and all. And I guess maybe 3 weeks went by, and one of the waiters or waitresses quit. There was a new waiter or waitress on the floor. I walked up to the manager and I said, hey, wait a minute, guy. Did you forget about me? And he said, what? What do you mean? He says, you said back 3 weeks ago when you hired me that, if I did well as a busboy, and I presume I've done well as a busboy. He said, yeah. I said, well, I presume that you will then promote me into the waiting staff. And he said, oh, I forgot. But next time, I'll remember. A couple weeks went by, and another waiting staff person quit. And the next day, a new staff person was in that place. I walked up to the manager and I said, listen, you said that I would get the next spot, and here there's somebody new on there. And he says, I'm sorry, Robin, I forgot again. I said, yeah, I'm thinking that I'm such a good busboy that you don't want to promote me into the waiter position because good busboys are difficult to find. He said, no, that's not it at all. You're good, and I'm sure you're going to be a good waiter, and the next position that opens up, you'll get. So I guess another month went by. So I'm here almost 3 months at the place now. And a waiter quits. And the next day, a new waiter is on the floor. I was a slow learner, I guess, And I walked up to him, and at this point, I was fuming with righteous anger. I said, you have promised me all the time that I've been here this position, and you have lied to me. You have not considered me. And he said, that's too bad. Get over it. And I said, well, that's not how I'm going to get over it. I quit. And I walked into the kitchen, and I guess there were some plates or something sitting there, and I don't remember whether it was cheesecake or spaghetti or whatever, but I took that plate and I just heaved it through the kitchen. And it splattered on the ceiling, on the walls, everywhere. And I stormed out of the place. That evening, I'd invited some of my buddies over to my house, to my apartment, from the last moving picture company restaurant. And they proceeded to give me, I'll say, the dickens, because he said they had to spend their afternoon between the lunch and dinner shift cleaning up the mess that I made. And I was humbled, really, really humbled. He said, I'm sorry. My temper got the better of me. And he said, well, we understand you were justly, it was just that you be angry. But it's how you express that anger that became a problem for us. It was a difficult lesson for me to learn. But a lesson that I learned nonetheless, that we need to control our tempers, our anger. We may have righteous anger and deserve to be angry. But it is, as I think James says, Be slow to anger so that you can reason it out, so that you can understand yourself and the situation and how best to apply it. Now, there was another gentleman, Alexander Papaderos from Crete, the island off of Greece. And as a young boy, he was during World War II, and the Nazis had paratrooped into Crete, onto the island. And he said he remembered that some of the villagers got up to fight them off, but all they had were kitchen knives and farm implements, and that the villagers that resisted them were shot. And so the Nazis grabbed control of the island. As a young man, after the war was over, he realized that the whole island had this anger towards the Germans that had come in. And he created a peace institute on the island. And that in the teachings that he would provide, in the workshops and all that they would offer, would be how to deal with anger, how to deal with righteous anger, how to deal with unfair things in your life, but how to deal with your anger and how to be peacemakers rather than warriors. And in one of the workshops that he was teaching, they asked him the meaning of life. And everybody just kind of chuckled because they knew that's a broad, broad subject. How do you give the meaning of life in a sentence or two? But Mr. Papaderos said, it's a fair question, I'll answer it. As a boy going through the island of Crete, there was a Nazi motorcycle that had wrecked. And in the wreckage, there was some broken pieces of mirror from the rearview mirror from the handlebars of the motorcycle. And he said, I tried to piece that mirror together because I was fascinated with the reflections that it would give. And he said, I gave up on that. That didn't work. It was too many pieces and too hard to put it together. But he said, I salvaged the largest fragment of the mirror. And then in my free time, I would take it and rub it against rocks. And eventually, I made this fragment of mirror into a little circular disc with smooth edges around and would walk into caves and use it to reflect light, to shine into the darkness, into the cave. And he reached in and he pulled out his wallet and opened it up and pulled out this mirror disc. And he said, I've carried that with me my entire life because I need that reminder that the reflection is us, that we are the reflection, and that we need to shine into the dark areas of the world and illuminate them. That is what Christ would have us do. So let us be peacemakers. Let us be bringers of Christ's light into the dark places of this world. Amen.